Hey gang, Fletcher here again with DJ Event Planner. Before we look at adding an event into the system, let's take a quick look at the settings that control what happens when we add an event or edit an event. And with that, I'm talking about our event form settings. So to get to those settings, once we're logged into our DJ Event Planner account, we're going to go to Setup, Application, and then Event Form. Please note that my screen may look a little bit different than yours as I have it zoomed in a little bit so you can clearly see the different sections. Under the first tab here, we'll find our default options. These are the default options of what happens when we add a new event into the system. At the top here, we have the ability to select what event status is added when we manually add an event into the system, as well as in a default event type. This is really only useful if you only service the same event type for everything. For example, if you only do weddings and no other types of events, you can just select wedding event type, and every event that you add will have an event type of wedding. You can also add a default venue and a default package. Here, I like to set my to be determined values because when I talk to a client, in the first conversation, we may not know what those are yet. Underneath the default employee options, we can have a default salesperson, default employee number 1 or number 2 automatically assigned when we add a new event. We can also set our attire for each and every event that we add into the system. Underneath the default client options, we can add a default client type, as well as a default client state. Next is specifically for the request for information form settings. When you import an event into the system from a submitted request for information form, you can set the default event status when that event is added, and you can populate the date of initial contact with either the current date or the date of the initial request for information. Preferably you don't leave those sitting in your inbox for too long though. Next, default contract due date. This is really only useful if you're sending a contract as soon as you add an event into the system. You can set X number of days that the contract due date will auto-populate to after today's date or the date that you add the event into the system. Again, this is only useful if you're sending out a contract as soon as you add an event into the system. Next, the default next action. Next actions, again, are your manual to-dos or reminders for events such as pick up the phone, call the client, and it could be just the next action or it can be date-based as well. Here you can populate what that next action will be for all new events that are added. And if you want to add a date to it, you can set it to a specific number of days after today's date. Next up, we have our default client portal settings. We can choose whether make a payment button, fees, and add-on fees are viewable or not by default in the client portal. And then lastly, down here, default planning options. If you have only one planning form or only one set of planning tools, you can assign those to every event automatically that gets added into the system by selecting those here, as well as you could choose whether the music request system is viewable and editable, as well as planning forms and timelines. Under the next tab is our employees default settings. Under check employee availability, this is how do employees display in the drop-down when you go to select an employee to add to an event, either alphabetical or by categorical. The employee roles, this is where you can set what roles are available to select from when you assign an employee to an event, and these will be visible in a drop-down under that event when you add an employee. So MC, mixer, DJ, etc. You can also set a maximum number of employees that you can assign per event. By default, the system is set to 15, and it's also a max of 15 employees per event. There's also a link to the employee notifications that will go out when an employee or a salesperson is assigned to an event. Simply click on that button and it'll take you to that notification setting. Now, an important one is the Financials tab. Here, there's a link to set up your payment method options. If you click on Configure, that'll take you to your payment methods and you can control the default payment methods that are listed. You can also control the number of add-ons that you can add per event. The system maximum is 20, but if you are using less than 20 and you only want to be able to assign 5 to every event, you can change that to 5 here. Next up is our discount list. This is the default discounts that we can add to an event, and you can add Discounts based upon a whole number or a percentage, and you can enter that as a percentage with 100% with the percent sign, or you can enter it as a decimal point with 0.10 for 10%. Next is additional scheduled payments. Here you can set the days before the event date that those scheduled payments are due. This does not auto-calculate the date and fill it for you, but it will allow you to autofill that date by clicking on a button to calculate it, and it'll automatically put that date then into that field. Again, it does not automatically fill that field with a date. It'll populate a button that you can click on to auto-calculate that date. And we can see that here when we edit this event underneath financials by clicking additional scheduled payments, and then we can click on autofill 60 days before the event date or autofill 30 days before the event date. Next, if you charge taxes, you can set your tax rate. Your base tax rate will be put in this field. Again, this is going to be the percentage amount, and you could choose whether that tax field is always visible or not underneath the event financials. If you happen to charge a second tax rate, you can also enter that here. And then additional tax settings. You could choose whether that second tax amount is calculated on the initial amount or the initial amount plus the first tax value. If you charge a different tax rate per venue, then you can enable that here. You can also choose if tax is calculated on a per package and per add-on basis. If you have this enabled, you can select what packages and what add-ons have tax. If you uncheck this, then the tax will apply to all packages and add-ons. You can also choose if tax is calculated based upon the travel fee, as well if it's calculated before discounts. And lastly, you can choose whether or not the tax amount is included or excluded from the total fee in financial reports. And last but not least, underneath the Financials tab is Overtime Settings. You can choose whether overtime is calculated on a fixed rate or a prorated rate. Fixed rate is based on a half hourly or hourly. So for example, if you have this set to fixed rate, and you have an overtime of 45 minutes, the system will round it up to a full hour. If you have it on a prorated amount, it'll base it upon that 45 minutes. The next tab is our layout. This will allow us to choose what the layout looks like and what things we can see when we're adding or editing an event. Underneath the page layout options, we can choose whether it's visible as tabs, one page, or as accordions. We can also choose different views between desktop and mobile versions. When it comes to the default view for editing the page, we can choose it as either tabs or as one page. If we have it set to one page, all of the information will be on one page and we can scroll down to those different sections. Versus if we have it as tabs, we can select the different tabs. So next under the layout is Status Details block. And this dictates what employee is visible in the status details block. The status details block, when viewing an event, is the block right here in the upper right-hand side. By default, it shows the salesperson. You can choose it to either have the salesperson, the primary employee, or you can hide the employee from that block. Next, the employee wages on report page. You could choose to hide wages, which will create a button that you must click on to see the wages, or you can uncheck it and the wages will be visible. Again, those wages will be found underneath the Staff tab, and you'll see here. So you'll see that the wage is currently hidden, and if you click on Show, it'll show the wages. If you have this unchecked, then the wages will be visible by default. Lastly, in this section, you can manage the tabs, their order, and their naming by clicking on this button. You'll be able to drag and drop these tabs to order them in an order that makes sense for you, as well as you can change the names or the titles of those tabs. Next, under the Layout tab, we have our event-based fields. We can choose what fields are included when we're adding or editing an event. For example, if you don't want to see a tire, you can uncheck that box and save, and it will not be visible when you add or edit an event. And then lastly, client-based fields. What fields would you like to have visible or see? If you don't use fax phone, for example, you can uncheck that box, save it, and you won't see it anymore when you're adding or editing an event. Next up is the Options tab. These are the default options that will appear when you're adding or editing an event. As far as the inquiry source, for example, as well as a tire, and the next action list. You can add a new next action when you're editing an event, as well as a new inquiry source, or you can build out that list here in the event form settings. And lastly is the validation tab, one of the most important tabs in my opinion. There's 4 options here. Require availability check for employees, enable fee filler warning, disable fee filler warning if package price equals 0, and warn if date is in the past when adding a new event. The first one, require availability check for employees, I definitely enjoy having enabled. What this does is it forces you to double check the date prior to adding an employee to an event. So when you're editing an event and you get to the staff tab, and instead of being able to select an employee, there's a button here that you must click on, which will open up in a new window, and it will show you all of your employees as well as what events they already have assigned to them. It's a great fail-safe to double check your work and make sure that you're not double booking yourself or double booking an employee. The enable fee filler warning will let you know if there's a package or add-on that doesn't have a fee listed in it. So when you're building out the financials, so if you happen to leave it at 0, the fee filler warning will pop up and let you know that, hey, that add-on or that package is at 0. If you happen to run an a la carte business where you don't use packages, but everything is built out based upon add-ons, you can check this box to disable the fee filler warning if the package price equals 0. So that way you can add a placeholder package and then build out the financials with add-ons and you won't receive that warning. And then lastly, warn if date is in the past when adding a new event. If you add an event to today or prior, when you go to save that event, a warning will pop up that says, hey, this event is in the past. Are you sure you want to add it? This is kind of important one. I can't tell you myself personally how many times I've added an event to today, saved the event, and went back to go look for that event on their event date and couldn't find it. So this is a very important one to have enabled as well, in my opinion. So that's it for the event form settings. Make sure you go through them, set it up to what makes most sense for your workflow and your business. As always, should you ever have any questions, you can find support through support options in the left menu of your account, and includes live chat, support forum, a link to our YouTube channel, as well too if you're not a member of our DJ Event Planner users group on Facebook, make sure you join that. That's a great place to ask quick questions and see what other users are doing. And as always, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our channel to receive future updates. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Happy planning.